name of God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Please be seated. This morning, in our final gospel reading, we heard the only story in the entire New Testament, outside of the Christmas story, that tells us anything about Jesus' childhood. The story takes place just after the holidays. Jesus is 12 years old, and we find him in Jerusalem, hanging out in church. Which really shouldn't surprise us, because when your mother is the queen of heaven, you are likely to spend a whole lot of time in church as a kid. So here's Jesus. He's having a conversation with the staff theologians, making religious observations, asking biblical questions, and fully engaging in the Sunday school curriculum. And Jesus' teachers, they are impressed. And everybody there is amazed when the child speaks in church. Now, this probably isn't going to come as much of a surprise to any of you, but I spent a whole lot of time in church myself. Both as a child and as an adult. I spent a whole lot of time in this church, and I've had a whole lot of conversations with a whole lot of people. And some of the most insightful and profound theological questions and observations that I have heard in this space take place when the child speaks in church. Just a few years ago, during Trinity's neighborhood camp, I was with a group of campers right here in this sanctuary. And one little girl, who was about 8 years old, took a look around at our beautiful stained glass windows, our marvelous marble altar, and our high raised pulpit, and she asked this question: how much does it cost to get baptized in this church? That, my friends, is a provocative theological question, one that should make us all stop just for a minute and wonder what it is about this space that could cause a child to equate cash with grace and salvation with credit. Later on that same week, another camper pointed at the cross above our altar and asked this theological question: who is that guy? Who is that guy? And thinking that she was completely ignorant of ecclesiastical iconography and the rich symbols of our salvation history, I said to her in all love and sincerity, "That's Jesus." To which she replied, "That's not Jesus. Mama says Jesus is black." That little girl ain't wrong. And neither is her mother, which makes me wonder, whose image are we hanging above our altars? Now, of course, not all of the theological observations that come out of the mouths of children cause us adults so much consternation. I once heard a young theologian say this about Trinity: I love going to church because everybody knows me there. Everybody knows me there. What a witness. What a testimony to what beloved community looks like. A place where everybody is somebody. Somebody to love, somebody to know, somebody to celebrate. My friends, I have heard the child speak in church, and I am amazed. You know, I used to imagine the 12-year-old Jesus, the Jesus that we meet in this morning's text, I used to imagine him having highfalutin academic conversations with all those men of exceptional learning in the temple at Jerusalem. I used to imagine him having discussions about whether or not Moses wrote the Pentateuch. I used to imagine him exegeting with his Sunday school teachers the entire book of Ruth. I used to imagine him arguing with the theologians and the scribes about the nature of biblical truth. You know, all those important theological concepts that folks like me spend a whole lot of time and a whole lot of money learning all about in seminary. But after several years of listening to the child speak in church, including my own children, I now bring a different set of hermeneutical lenses to this pericope about Jesus and his anxious family. Now I imagine Jesus passing the money changers in the narthex and asking his teachers how much God charges for salvation. And asking them what happens to the folks who can't afford to buy bread for their family, let alone to sacrifice for their sins. I imagine the child looking at all those steps leading up to the temple and asking his teachers how the lame man begging on the corner was going to maneuver past all those obstacles between him and the Lord's table. I imagine the child asking his teachers why it was that only men were standing in the pulpit and in the places that were most holy. A logical question coming from the son of Mary, whose mother literally carried God within her body. So I don't know if Jesus wowed the crowd with his biblical memory or his exegetical ability or his aptitude for historical, redactional, informed critical theory. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But I got a feeling that it was the simple, profound, clear questions and observations of a child that caused all those grown-ups to think about. Perhaps even to rethink some of the assumptions that they had made about God and their responsibility towards their neighbor. When the child spoke in church, the people were amazed. But I kind of wonder, did they really pay attention? Did those grown-ups really listen to what the child had to say? The next time we see Jesus in the temple, at least according to Luke's gospel, the next time we see him in this space, he is 33 years old. He leaves the temple at age 12 and comes back at age 33. So apparently it's not just Episcopalians who have a hard time getting their kids to come to church after confirmation. And when he reappears, he is angry. He's angry because not a whole lot has changed since he was 12. The money changers are still selling their wares in the narthex. The priests are still placing profit over people. The preachers on staff are still justifying the status quo rather than casting the mighty down from their thrones. Which makes me wonder if the grown-ups in today's text really listened when the child spoke in church. Makes me wonder if they really listened to the 12-year-old Jesus and took what he said to heart, because if they had, maybe they would have made some important changes to the temple, and perhaps Jesus wouldn't have turned over so many tables when he came back at age 33. We here at Trinity, we are blessed. We're blessed with an abundance of children. You may not have seen them for the past few months because ever since we've come back to in-person worship, they spent most of their time in the North Parish Hall. But they are here, and they are growing. In fact, they're growing so much that we're going to add another Sunday school class later on this month. And hopefully, if we can get ourselves to the other side of this pandemic, hopefully we will see children in this space again for communion, for fellowship, for coffee hour, and for Trinity Neighborhood Camp. And when the kids return to the sanctuary, you can rest assured that the child is going to speak in church. And when the child speaks, I invite us to listen. To listen to what she has to say, to take to heart what the child has to say, because when the child speaks in church, right in the middle of the prayer of consecration, maybe God is trying to tell us that the incarnation in the baby came before and was just as important as the transubstantiation of the bread. When the child speaks in church by running to the altar before being invited by the usher, maybe God is trying to tell us that grace does not always follow our liturgical order. When the child speaks in church by refusing to be still in our hard wooden pews, maybe God is trying to tell us that the problem isn't the diversity of human bodies, but the uniformity of our artificial seating. When the child speaks in church by making observations that make us uncomfortable, maybe God is trying to tell us that unquestioned beliefs and practices can sometimes be unholy breeding grounds for idols. And when the child speaks in church in the middle of the preaching, maybe God is trying to tell someone that it's time to wrap up the sermon and to get along with the prayer. So my friends, when the child speaks in church, rest assured she will. I pray that you will listen. Listen to what she has to say. Listen to what he has to say. Listen to what the Christ child has to say, because it just might lead us closer to salvation. And perhaps the child won't be so inclined to turn over our tables when he comes back to church at age 33. Amen.